Welcome back. Vermont's Child Development Division is working to improve operations following a telling audit last month. We sat down with the state's auditor's office and the Development Division about next steps, ensuring where you decide to send your child is one of the safest places they can be. In a recent audit released by the state auditor's office, the state identified some of the shortfalls within the Department for Children and Families Child Development Division.
I think many people, when they think of the auditor's office, they think that we make sure the state's finances are in order and that we're rooting out fraud, waste, and abuse. And we absolutely do those things. But we also look at the core functions of state government to make sure that the state is performing them effectively and up to the level that Vermonters deserve. So we have a special emphasis on vulnerable populations. So I think our youngest children would qualify as a vulnerable population, especially as parents entrust their kids to child care programs. We want to make sure those programs are safe.
Over a 2-year period, the state identified 131 serious violations. The over 30-page document found that there were inconsistencies identifying and addressing serious violations. The audit also outlined a significant delay in cleared background checks. From 2022 to 2024, over 80 background checks commenced, with more than half of them not completed more than 85 days later, a process meant to take no longer than 45 days.
Our auditors inspected a massive trove of records relating to the inspections that are performed by the state over these facilities, with a special emphasis on serious violations. Serious violations, unlike maybe a more routine finding, are when either there's staffing problems, meaning there are too few adults to actually safely monitor the number of children in the room, or there are findings that would risk the health, safety, or well-being of the children in the room. So our team of auditors spent months working with the Child Development Division to try to see how they were performing in that regard.
Over the course of 2 years, you have over 100 serious incidents. What do you make of that in terms of, how parents may be feeling after hearing this, and especially now that we're in 2026? It's kind of, a daunting feeling to know that your child was in one of these spaces or still is.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth putting in context that our review included a time period that had 5,000 inspections of child care facilities, and there were 131 known serious violations. So it's a relatively small percentage. One of our findings, though, is that number is understated because the Child Development Division wasn't always properly identifying some of the violations as serious the way state law and rules require. Even if that number is a low percentage of all of the inspections that are done, for each parent who has a kid in one of those programs, it's the most important finding that could be found, right? So a serious violation generally means that one or more children were put in an environment that was not safe. So on the one hand, the very high rate of compliance is very good news. But the reason we do these audits is to make sure that systems are in place to whittle down that number of non-compliance events to the smallest number possible and work with the Child Development Division to empower them to fix problems that we've identified in their systems.
In a series of recommendations, the Child Development Division was told to implement systemic changes meant to boost efficiency within the division and safe practices at child care centers statewide.
What the audit found wasn't really questions about how the division handled, its investigations and how, but it was around how we documented things after the fact. And so that's a place where, we can make some process improvements. We also know that improving our data system will also be a huge help, because right now there's a lot of detail. We have a lot of regulations, we have a lot of rules about what needs to be documented, but a lot of that is then done manually and checked over by supervisors, again in much more of a manual process within a database that is pretty old.
Janet McLaughlin is the Deputy Commissioner for the Child Development Division. She says aside from the potential for human error with their workflow, there also needs to be clear regulations when it comes to the discretion held by the division, which some consider outdated.
I think the auditor's office, felt that there were some places where the division was using discretion, that they felt that the law said we didn't have the discretion. That's one of the recommendations, is look into that a little bit more to find out if there needs to potentially be a small statute change. An example there might be when a program does a self-report to us. and they're going to report to us that perhaps they were a staff person arrived late, and so they were out of ratio in a classroom for 15 minutes. And so we might document it as a violation, but we might not document it as a serious violation. And the state auditor's office is saying, I think you're supposed to be documenting that as a serious violation. And why that's important, really from a community level and from a family level, is that when we document things as a serious violation, that triggers a parental notification letter. And so from the perspective of wanting to make sure that parents are informed about what's happening at their program, can feel confident in their children's safety and well-being, and that all the rules are being followed, that distinction between serious and non-serious, it is important.
What do you say to parents who kind of see this and kind of see the headline of like, oh, 131 serious violations? What do you want them to understand about this audit in terms of how their children are being cared for?
We know that the people who work in that department show up every day trying to make sure that kids are in a safe environment. So our job is not to finger wag at them, but to find the opportunities to improve the quality of their work. So they've accepted all of our recommendations and laid out a strategy to adopt them. So among our recommendations were to improve the IT system, which is antiquated and leads to all sorts of problems, both in terms of monitoring these violations and making sure that they're being corrected when they're found, but also prevent the department from even notifying parents when serious violations occur in some instances. So that's a terrible situation where a parent might be looking at which child care facility they want to entrust their kids to, but they don't have the full information, which could include serious violations either in the past or more recently. We also called on both the department, but really a series of state partners to get to the bottom of this background check and fingerprint screening process.
While occasionally something happens, they really should feel confident that Vermont has a very strong system around child safety within child care. But they should also, do their homework. Obviously start early, which is the advice we give everybody, and is only sometimes so helpful when there's only so many spaces. But start early, ask questions of the program, take a tour, talk to your friends who might also have kids enrolled in programs. And if something's not feeling right to you, you should talk to that program director, talk to other parents, and people should feel free to call the division,
Last month, Frog and Toad, a child care facility based in Burlington, was temporarily closed following allegations of abuse. The Child Development Division led the investigation and did a full review of the licensing and other site violations. That report was shared with the program and its families. Here's what Jenna McLaughlin had to say about that investigation.
We take action right away to make sure that we are mitigating whatever risk there is right away while the investigation gets going. We bring in our partners from the Family Services Division, which really focus on child abuse and neglect allegations and investigations. And when necessary, we also consult with law enforcement, with special investigations on the law enforcement side, and also there's a UVM Child Safe Clinic. So we really have a team that really steps in if we're concerned about a serious situation, and then we would conduct a detailed investigation and that includes looking at video footage, doing staff interviews, doing parent interviews, talking to people that might work in neighboring businesses to really try to get a sense of what is happening so that we can really document what happened.
And we now know the Frog and Toad Burlington location voluntarily closed its program on March 20th while the investigation from the Child Development Division was ongoing. It now lies with law enforcement, who will continue to investigate into claims of child neglect and abuse. Officials will then decide whether or not to press charges. The Essex location is separately licensed, and that's a child care facility there with a different program director. The division did a review of that location, found that the site holds a clean regulatory record with no history of complaints from families or staff. And in northern New York, a similar state investigation led to the closure of a popular daycare center. We spoke with NBC5's Sophia Falbo on the latest. First, Sophia, can you explain how this all started?
Thanks for having me, Adrian. A New York State investigation in March found the YMCA Bright Beginnings in Plattsburgh to have multiple violations, including allegations of child abuse and inappropriate discipline. On March 12th, the state suspended the Bright Beginnings license, leaving dozens of families scrambling to find childcare. The Plattsburgh YMCA board put the entire Bright Beginnings staff on paid leave.
And all of this led to a little bit of a leadership shakeup following the Bright Beginnings shutdown. What did that entail, Sophia?
That's right, Adrian. The board fired 3 top executives just 1 week after the daycare center closed. The Plattsburgh YMCA's CEO and COO and the Bright Beginnings director were all part of this termination. We now know that the lead teacher was also terminated. The vice chair of the board says the decision was made with the best interest of the families in mind. Take a listen.
Children were harmed, and we wanted to make sure that there was accountability involved in making sure that those children can feel safe when we work to reopen the center.
A few days later, the board unanimously appointed Jeffrey Collin as the interim CEO and selected Stephanie Purcell as the acting director for Bright Beginnings. There are no plans to hire a COO at this time. The board says Collin and Purcell were chosen for their respective roles because of their decades-long experience. Collin served as CEO and interim CEO for several YMCA associations nationwide. Purcell has a background in childcare and has been in multiple leadership roles within the Plattsburgh YMCA.
Lastly, Sophia, what are the next steps for Bright Beginnings?
Well, Collin and Purcell have both already started in their new roles. The board says it's working with a third party, as well as the state's Office of Children and Family Services and our local Child Care Coordinating Council to provide in-depth training to the Bright Beginnings staff. The daycare must also meet OCFS regulations, and they're hoping to reopen the daycare as soon as possible, especially for the many families who may be going weeks now without childcare due to the lack of options in Clinton County.